And welcome back to IoT Innovation. Today we're going to talk about the Internet of Me, yet another acronym to get our heads around.
This episode of IoT Innovation is sponsored by Anritsu.
Telecom Careers, the #1 global telecom and wireless job board, telecomcareers.com.
Welcome back to IoT Innovation. Today we're going to be speaking with Kevin Lindsay, who heads product marketing at Adobe. So welcome, Kevin. Thanks for joining me today. You've introduced yet another acronym to my vocabulary, the Internet of Me. So please talk to us a little bit about personalization, context, and maybe start with how Adobe fits into the IoT ecosystem.
Sure. Thank you very much, Chris. Good morning. I think that my goal is not to introduce yet one more acronym for you to have to worry about, but I do think this one's important. And let me tell you why. So Adobe has long been in the business of helping companies create great experiences, great digital experiences for their customers. And over the years, that has evolved. Several years ago, Adobe got into the digital marketing space when it acquired an analytics company called Omniture, and since then has built out the digital marketing business very significantly. To the extent that we have solutions that address data and analytics, content, personalization and targeting, advertising solutions, social marketing, and a number of other things. So we find ourselves at this point where digital marketing is almost becoming it's definitely a ubiquitous term everyone uses in so many different ways. The impact of digital marketing now, though, is not just on those traditional digital channels or the e-commerce store. It's really pervasive across the entire customer experience, that whole customer life cycle, if you will. And with the introduction of things like the Internet of Things and wearables, we see the extension of that marketing optimization opportunity right into that deep into that customer experience and deep into that product experience, which is where our customers ultimately are residing and experiencing our brand in significant ways. So as we get into this sort of new world where experiences are happening everywhere all the time and through so many different modalities, it's really important to think about the role that we as brands play and how we ensure that the experiences are relevant and meaningful and are overall adding to that customer experience rather than taking away from it or being an interruption. So the Internet of Me is really kind of cutting to the chase and saying, let's really get real with these experiences. It's not about another thing that is connected to the internet or something that I wear that is tracking certain physical or biometrics on my body. It's really about how does it ultimately have an impact on the experience that I have, or how does it have an impact on me ultimately? And that's really what brands are trying to do. They're trying to connect with the me and make it much more about that experience than the device or the wearable itself.
Okay, so if we take that, and I mean, we're all familiar with movies like Minority Report, where the Internet of Me is taken to the extreme, and all of these sensors are feeding back crazy amounts of information. Marketing is very personalized to the extent that it's intrusive almost. How do you see the marketing teams of the big brands really starting to look at IoT? Have they really started looking at it yet? Is there still a little bit of a confusing space to them? Or are you starting to see some really good examples of brands that have figured this out? Because from my point of view, as we've been going through the hosting of this show over the last few weeks, I'm hearing a lot of conflicting views as to whether IoT has really been understood yet by some of the big companies in wireless, let alone brands that are not directly involved in the technology?
Yeah, so really all of the above. I think there's a lot of skepticism around IoT that marketers are experiencing. They're not really sure what it's going to mean to their brand. And there's certainly a lot of uncertainty around how it's going to, how they're going to be able to execute on IoT. It's definitely a buzzword that's in the boardrooms today. You know, what is our IoT strategy? And it's a question that's really difficult to answer for most companies. For others, it can be quite obvious. I mean, product companies like Sony, for them, there are some very obvious use cases, and they are clearly among the first, along with companies like Under Armour, to get into the business and really have clear use cases and opportunities to take advantage of the devices that their customers are using. But I think you're right. I think that there's a lot of skepticism, there's a lot of uncertainty, and not really understanding the role it will play in their marketing mix is a big part of it. I think that companies do have a pretty good understanding that it really is going to come down to data, that they're going to have a lot of data available to them as a result of these internet connected experiences. But then how to turn around and use that data to create more meaningful interactions and to create more impactful marketing. And again, marketing that doesn't become so invasive and so interruptive that it's reminiscent of the Minority Report.
So Nick, who's hosted a few of these programs with me, and we've talked about this, he and I presented at a workshop at the IoT World event in San Francisco in May. And one of the other presenters was a guy running the IoT project and business unit at Adidas. And what was interesting about that, which I think, to your point, says the conflicting issues with IoT, was that they're recording amazing amounts of data on athletes training on the field. And what the wake-up call they'd had was realizing that the coach really doesn't care about 200 different metrics on the player. They want to figure out which of those are the 3 or 4 important ones that they need to not only monitor, but be made aware of if something changes. And I think that really reads across to your point, is that, you know, I'm seeing a massive amount of data being collected now by all of these on-body, off-body, smartphones, all sorts of other devices in the home. And it's not just about the amount of data that's being collected. It's, okay, I've got all this raw material. What do I do with it? Because the raw data on its own is pretty much useless. And to me, it's about the interpretation and both the personalization, but also the anonymization of this data, so that we don't feel our privacy has been screwed up. But we also feel like this stuff is beneficial to us. Like, you know, for me, I'm a big user of Google Now. The fact that it reminds me I've got to head to the airport before I remembered I was actually on a plane today, that's actually not intrusive. That helps me. If it was trying to tell me which 3 restaurants were on the way to the airport, that would be helpful too. If it starts to feel like it's stalking me, that means the data's not been used in a way that's sensitive to the way I live my life.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and there's a fine line, isn't it? And it might be different for you than somebody else in terms of the tolerance of those notifications and those, you know, interruptions, if you will. And so I think that you bring up a really good point. The creepy factor is clearly something that everybody is thinking about, consumers and marketers alike. Nobody likes creepy. I like to, for a presentation I did a few months ago, I created a little kind of creepy meter or relevance meter that we kind of used in the session. And I think that the conclusion that everyone is able to come to is that, you know, if it's relevant, it's not creepy. If it's creepy, it's clearly not relevant. You've gone across the line. And what we see as we kind of work with a lot of different industries on this is that it varies by use case, by customer, by customer type, by, you know, is this a millennial we're talking about versus my mother-in-law? And so, you know, I think we have a lot to figure out in terms of really what are the best practices. Back to your Adidas example, a similar example that Under Armour shared at a conference a few months ago that I attended was, just being able to have, track usage in a pair of athletic shoes or some garment. It's a marketing opportunity for them because they can say, well, you know what, the optimal time to replace those running shoes, and this is actually a very important customer service and important to your health and the health of your body and your feet perhaps, but it's also a great time, if we can increase the rate at which people replace those shoes by just a small amount, by ensuring that they're replacing that product at the right time, it will result in a positive sales uplift. And so, that's a really interesting balance that when I listened to that, I really appreciated that it does seem to meet the needs of the customer without being creepy. But at the same time, it's clearly a great marketing optimization endeavor.
Yeah, I think your example of whether it's to millennials or your mother-in-law, I think that's an important consideration, because I think the creepy factor changes depending on the age group and the location in the world and your tolerance for technology and the way you embrace it. And certainly I've had those family examples where things that I absolutely not just tolerate but get very excited about in terms of IoT are way over the creepy line for other people that I talk to. I think the challenge is that, back to the amount of data here, we're slicing this marketing mix further and further and further. So now you've got to have way more sophistication, not just of analyzing and reusing the data that's being collected about you and for you with these sensors, but actually how do you then deliver it and making sure that you've really personalized what you're delivering for the right person, and that you realize it changes. I mean, basically you're talking about terabytes of live data that has to fly around to decide whether you're going over that creepy line.
That's right.
I'm a little concerned that the sophistication of most large brands may be starting this journey, but it's not sophisticated enough yet to deal with all of this live, really absolutely real-time analytics stuff that we're going to be needing.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And I think that, we sort of look at this treasure trove of data that we have, and there's so much that we can do with it. Most companies today in 2015 and marketing organizations are not fully equipped to take advantage of it. It's there, and the correlations and the patterns and the affinities between all the different types of data and what they mean and their predictive power is there. But to actually take that and make it an effective part of your marketing mix, to use your term, is challenging, and it's going to take some time to really figure that out. An example that I see, I drive from my house into the town of Los Gatos, and as soon as I get into downtown Los Gatos, I'm bombarded with notifications from a couponing app that I have, a kind of deal of the day thing, and they're not personalized in any fashion. They're for stores and retail establishments that I don't have any interest in. I don't have any purchasing history there, and really, if you kind of dug into my demographic, you might realize you really wasted that notification. You've wasted that marketing message on me, and it could have been more effective with someone else. So I think we're going to see a lot of early starts, and I actually really applaud that. I applaud the effort and the fact that this innovative app is doing this. I drive into their geofence and I start to get these things. That's great. I mean, that's really interesting. And you think about, I shouldn't take that for granted, because it hasn't been possible to do that for very long. So that's wonderful. But I do think we need to figure out how to make use of the data platform our marketing programs sit on, and really also figure out the best practices, because it's really going to come down more to that than technology and data, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think coming back to your term, the Internet of Me. I mean, I've talked to a few people where my belief is that IoT is actually all about you knowing things about things you care about.
Yeah.
So the Internet of Me is me and the stuff that I care about, and by stuff I mean my family, my friends, my pets, my property, and or the environment where I'm going to be at some point in the future. I think, again, what this points to is an amazing array of data that really is going to be a diamond if it's handled correctly. And I think this is going to drive quite a lot of extra education, sophistication, maybe a lot more cross-pollination of jobs, so that people that have traditionally been in a statistics role, let's say, where they've not been driving live data and analytics, this is a new department for them almost. Yeah. It reminds me of some of the the CIO role being created 20, 30 years ago, because the whole C-suite had to get a clue regarding the internet. And
right.
I feel like this is the same different. So coming on from that, maybe back to the original question about Adobe. I mean, I think everyone watching this is going to be very, very familiar with a number of the products and services that Adobe have offered. How does this really fit into and line up with some of those other business areas that people are more familiar with?
Yeah, so if you think about what we're ultimately trying to do, we're trying to put the right experience in context in front of the right person. It comes down to that no matter what. And if I can just take a second to sort of add a couple more things to your Internet of Me statement and the conclusion that you've come to personally on it, and I'll come back to that, because I had a couple of thoughts. From an analytics perspective, our ability to sort of look at the data in this new Internet of Everything era means that we can get much, much more granular. So in addition to, the things that you care about, that's how the Internet of Me is defined for you. It also means, from a data perspective, that we can get much more granular. We can get much more relevant and get closer and closer to actually understanding me than ever before. But I also think the other important thing is that, I and you, Chris, we don't care as consumers what issues some brand might have with connecting me and understanding me as I move across all these different touch points. I just want them to get me and to give me good service, give me relevant products, and make it an enjoyable customer experience. And that's a very me-centric view, right? I don't care if it's my phone or my Apple Watch or my Apple TV, or I happen to walk into your store. Just get your act together and make it about me. I want a great experience. So in light of those two things, from a data perspective, Adobe has built a very, very strong data foundation on our analytics foundation. Analytics has come a long way over the years. It's not just web analytics. It's not just digital analytics. It's not just customer analytics. It's looking across that entire life cycle and really understanding kind of what's happening and being able to bring all those things together. So customers like Sony, they're building their Internet of Things strategy on a data platform. It's not about the individual devices. Initially, if you don't get the data platform right in the first place and in a way that allows you to create meaningful insights and understand those patterns and behaviors across all of these different touch points, whether someone is actually interacting with the brand while they're playing a game in a PS4, or they're going into one of their stores or into Best Buy. I mean, really being able to connect those things, and that kind of brings me to the second point I made, really is essential. So the data platform is where we're very, very interested in and where we've invested heavily to really facilitate this move to an Internet of Everything or Internet of Me type of era. But in addition, kind of going back to the heritage that Adobe has, which is creating these assets and creating these beautiful experiences in the first place, whether they be, beautiful, images or animation or video content. We want to be able to, take that investment that brands put into that asset creation and then tie that to the data. So none of these things can really take place without the right marriage of content and data to facilitate that great experience, again, wherever it might take place. That's our viewpoint on it.
All right, so with the Internet of Me, it's still at a fairly early stage. I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to try and fail, and there's hopefully going to be a few that try and succeed. From the work that you're doing, can you pick up on some examples of companies that are really starting to figure it out and do a nice job so far? Maybe things that you maybe come back to the millennial versus mother-in-law, maybe some examples that appeal to both groups, because ultimately, the dollars are going to be spent more easily if they're focusing on a broader group.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting way to look at it as well. I've been very interested in millennials recently. I did a talk on Monday at a conference in Scottsdale, and we were focused on the millennials. And of course, as you look at any demographic cohort, it's not all, you can't really make blanket statements, and there's always going to be the 18-year-old millennial who stands up and says, well, that doesn't really describe me. But what's interesting is as you look at data, and it really always comes down to data. Data is something we can rely on pretty well. We can make some pretty good take to the bank kinds of statements about different types of segments, shoppers, etc. So just in terms of what I'm seeing and what I think is really interesting is that this Internet of Me concept is not one that is entirely tied to the Internet of Things. I mean, the Internet of Me is more important, I believe, than the Internet of Things, because it's really informative in terms of how do I look at my customer, how do I look at what my customer is trying to do, never mind what channel they're trying to do it through. And I think that we're seeing some really interesting examples today that maybe are kind of conflict with some of our digital thinking. There are some really interesting examples like Trunk Club. Trunk Club was acquired, I think, probably a year ago by Nordstrom. But this is the very personalized shopping experience that's rather old school. Yes, you've got a really nice app where you can kind of look at the different types of clothing categories, whether it's casual or work or.
It's basically a personal shopper organization, right?
That's right. But you're actually connected with a person, a real person, who says, "I'm going to pick out this wardrobe for you. I'll be packing your trunk personally, and I'm going to phone you." So you get an email once you sign up and choose your category, and this person indeed phones you up and says, I want a little bit more insight before I assemble your first trunk. So I think it's really interesting because that type of personalization is really an example of the Internet of Me, and is honestly quite appealing to the millennials. When we look at the kinds of characteristics exhibited by the millennials, they are very community oriented. They're very sort of value oriented. They love things like the real, luxury consignment, where they're not necessarily, they're buying gently used. They also like the concept of a product being just for me. You've designed this thing just for me. Another example, I believe of that is the phone hardware company OnePlus. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yes.
When I asked that question, so many people might have never heard of them. But my son, who's a millennial, that's the phone he owns, and he loves the fact that he could not buy that product until he was invited to buy that product.
Right.
So he was on there, reading their blogs. He was listening to what everyone in their community had to say about this product before he really signed himself up to be part of that community. But again, it's a combination of digital yet very, very personal investment in the customer experience that kind of defines the Internet of Me.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I mean, thinking about friends and family and colleagues, I think it is absolutely a combination that maybe the millennials are the first age group to take on board not just the technology aspects of this interaction, but actually the technology plus the personalized human interaction as well. I think the older the generation, the more likely you are to stick with the tools that were useful when you were growing up. Whereas I think the millennials, they don't separate between video conferencing and texting and emails and actually meeting someone. They're doing all of them at the same time. And right. I think really, I've seen that with my own children, that it doesn't occur to them that they're multitasking because that's what they do.
That's right.
I think especially when you start to get into luxury brands, which of course are the target for most marketing campaigns and most marketing organizations, they're looking for people that are spending higher dollars on particular products. They're going to have to use all of these tools. So it's interesting, starting out this discussion, I considered the Internet of Me as kind of a subset of IoT, but I can absolutely see how you see it the other way around. So do you think, just to finish up maybe, do you think we've got the right people in the marketing organizations within these large brands, or are we going to have to go through some serious upskilling of educating people about the technology and how the technology changes the buying habits?
Yeah, so I have a couple of thoughts on that. We did a study at Adobe I think it was about 1.5 years ago, and it was really focused on digital distress. We wanted to understand, measure and understand how people thought about just that. Are they ready for this new era of marketing? Do they have the right kinds of people? Do they have the right kinds of skill sets? Are they, as leaders, confident they have what it takes? Or the other way around, do you feel your leadership is really the right leadership to take you through this transformation? And the answers were really, they weren't all that surprising. I would say they're much more, people are much harder on themselves than I expected. Most organizations sort of felt like they don't have the skill set. They don't have the right organization. They're not really set up in a way to execute on these new strategies. And so I thought that was really interesting. I also think it's interesting that we're starting to see massive reorganizations of what is marketing and what is customer experience or support or the revenue generation. I mean, it's really all changing. And this year we really focused on kind of marketing beyond marketing as a theme at Adobe. And by that we mean, a couple of things, that the marketing is being done by organizations other than just marketing, and they need to be. Right. When you have a call center person, an agent on the phone with somebody, or through live chat, they represent the brand. So if you're not ensuring that marketing and that infusion of the brand promise is happening throughout every type of customer interaction, you're really failing as a marketing, not just a marketing organization, but a marketing driven company. So lots of changes happening there. In addition, thinking about, and this is back to IoT in a lot of ways, marketing being extended right into that product experience. And there's lots of product companies that are great examples of this. I mentioned Under Armour and Sony previously. But I think that there's a lot more companies that are thinking about this. Another one that comes to mind is Sonos, the speaker, you can't even just really call them a speaker company, the music experience company, how you experience music in a very personal way in your home. It's very much like the promise of Sonos brand and what they're trying to do for their customers in their homes is it's very, very personalized. It's very much about the Internet of Me, in my opinion, but it's also marketing done in an excellent way, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, as much as I asked the question around upskilling the marketing department, I think it's actually upskilling the whole organization, because everyone is, it's an overused term maybe, but everyone is a brand ambassador when you've got customers that can very, very easily vote with their feet and spend their money somewhere else. I mean, the amount of attention this is starting to get with, I'm standing in a line somewhere, and my wife says to me, hey, we've run out of X, Y, or Z. And before we've moved 2 paces in the line, Amazon have already shipped it to me. This kind of improved decision making and instant gratification means that the marketing message has to be even more crisp, because I'm probably making a decision way faster than I would have done a few years ago without some of these online tools.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Kevin, thank you very much indeed for joining me. You've certainly helped me be educated on the Internet of Me, and it is another acronym, but I think it's a worthy one. So thank you for chatting through it a little bit with us and about some of the background of the way Adobe is changing this landscape. So
my pleasure, Chris.
Again,
thanks very much.
Thank you. So today, that was IoT Innovation. My guest today was Kevin Lindsay, the Head of Product Marketing at Adobe. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to speaking to you next week.
IoT Innovation is a production of RCR TV. To reach Chris Hare or suggest a show topic for IoT Innovation, you can reach Chris at cbh@ntete.com. To find out more about IoT innovation and all things wireless, visit rcrwireless.com.